Hey everyone, thank you for joining me today. We are painting a goldfinch on a coneflower, and we're starting off tracing this rectangle that is 6 by 7.5 centimeters. The paper that I'm using today is 140-pound cold pressed 100% cotton paper. I'll put the name up on the screen. The next step is to trace a dime in the upper right-hand corner of the rectangle. And then I'm dividing the rectangle using just a scrap of paper. You can use a ruler, one way and then the other way, so that it is divided into 4 parts. And this just helps me visualize where I want the bird. And then I'm also dividing that little circle, the dime that we traced, into 4 parts. For the next part, I'm starting this kind of a wavy line, which to me almost looked like a fish with a tiny little fish tail down at the lower right-hand corner. But it's a wavy line that starts at the dime, and then it goes down to the far bottom left-hand corner, and then the top of that line, or the top of the bird, starts at the dime again, almost at that halfway mark, and then meets up again at the bottom left-hand corner. And then for the head of the bird, I am going around the dime, just using that line of the dime. But when I get to the beak area, I bring it in just a little bit, so it's a little bit off of that line of the dime. And then the beak is kind of like a rounded triangle. A rounded triangle with a little line going down, not quite the center of it, to show that it has the top part of the beak and the bottom part of the beak. I do erase it and go over it again, as I'm using a very soft pencil so that you can see my lines well on the camera, and it just gets a little bit too dark and too wide sometimes. So you'll want to use a very light pencil. Just a regular pencil will work. This one is I think it's a 6B pencil, so the higher the number in front of a B, the softer the pencil. So you don't want to use a soft pencil for this. You want to use just a regular pencil is fine, so that you can erase your lines more easily. The lighter line on your paper, the better. It's easier to erase. So then for the eye, it's just a little circle to the left of the line on the top of your dime outline. And then the very top of that bird, the little swoop at the top of the head, it starts on one side of the dime outline, the circle, one side of that halfway point, and then it goes down and it stops right above the other halfway point. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well. I tried to break it down into very simple shapes, but it is kind of a complicated form. I will have an outline that you can just print, rub a pencil on the back of the paper, and then go over the line so that you can transfer the image or the line drawing onto your paper and not have to worry about drawing it yourself. But if you would like to draw it and you would like to follow this bit of the drawing tutorial and maybe even simplify it more for yourself, I always loved following how to draw books when I was little and as an adult as well. So that could be fun for you too. If not, just print off the image, do the outline that way, and it's just as much a piece of art tracing as it is drawing it yourself. It just depends on what you find pleasure in, whether you enjoy drawing it yourself or if you enjoy the painting more and would like the drawing part to be a bit more simplified, printing something off and then rubbing your pencil on the back of that printed paper, going over the lines. I do have a video on how to do that, on how to easily transfer a line drawing or an image that you've printed off of the computer onto your watercolor paper, and I will figure out how to link it to this video. So those areas that you see in the wing, those are what I want to keep white. So they are important. You don't have to draw them in, but I find that if I draw them in, I have an easier time remembering to keep those areas white. Now I'm putting in 2 little lines for the legs. The leg in the front, the line goes back at an angle and then forward a little bit at another angle. You can do the legs however you want. I'm just simplifying them and kind of hiding them a little bit in this coneflower that I'm now drawing. So for the coneflower, it's kind of in the shape of an umbrella or maybe an egg on top of an umbrella. So just a little oval and then the umbrella shape coming down. Once you're happy with your drawing, go ahead and use your kneaded eraser to lighten up your pencil lines. For this painting, I'm using a number 12 round brush and also a number 0 round brush for the little details towards the end. So as you can see, my palette already has paints on it. I have done quite a few of these birds in preparation for this video, so my palette already has color on it. But I made a light wash of cadmium yellow light, and I'm painting the head of the bird and the body of the bird that is not covered by that black wing. So even the very top of the bird, where it will be black eventually, as well as the beak and the front of the bird's breast or the belly of the bird, and the underneath of the bird, covering that whole area with that very light wash of the cadmium yellow light. I then wash off the brush and dry it a little bit on the paper towel, and I'm getting some of that magenta rose onto the brush. The brush is still wet enough where I don't need to make a little puddle of the magenta rose. I just put it on in 8 little dots directly from dipping the brush into the pan of color and making the dots from that. And then for each petal, I'm rinsing off the brush and using just water. I'm making the form of the petal. The paint in the dot follows the water, and so it creates that form of that petal, just for our more loose, not detailed, fun way to paint coneflowers. After rinsing that color off the brush, I'm now using the quinacridone violet and making just little tiny brush strokes with the very tip of the brush. Some of them are touching the petals, and when they do, that violet blends in with the magenta rose, which I think is really pretty. So I'm not worried about that happening. I actually really like the look of that. And then rinsing the quinacridone violet off my brush and going into the magenta rose again, and again making those little brush marks with the very tip of the brush. This way I'm able to go from purple to yellow without creating a brown. So after the magenta rose, washing it off again, dabbing it a little bit on the paper towel, and now I'm using, it's just called bright red, and dabbing that in the same way, just little bits of that color, a little bit less with the red than with the magenta rose. Rinsing that off my brush, dabbing it on the paper towel. And the next color I'm going to go for is that bright yellow. So this is a little bit trickier. I make sure not to have quite as much water on my brush, so that's why I'm going back and dabbing it on the paper towel a little bit. Because if it runs all the way down through all the colors, it makes brown, which that can look pretty as well, but I'm trying to prevent too much brown from happening. And so just trying to keep that yellow on the very tippy top layer. This creates a glow. It looks like the coneflower is being hit by the sunlight, and you get that really pretty glow. If you look at a coneflower, you can see it looks like that even without the sunlight hitting it. It just has this really pretty, like a yellow glow to those cones of the coneflowers. I just think it's a really fun way to capture that. So then I rinse off my brush, and we are going to tackle the wing, which might seem a little scary, but it's not as difficult as it looks. I'm starting off with a wash of, it's just called blue in this set. You can use any blue you want, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, any of the blues would look really nice. And I'm very carefully following the lines that I have drawn. And the yellow is super dry, bone dry, so it's not blending into it and creating a green. It's staying right in the wing where I want it to stay. And by using the blue and following the lines that I've drawn, if I do go outside of those lines into the wing, it'll be easy to pick up that color and for it to look like kind of a bluey white if I make a mistake. So I unfortunately lost the footage of painting the rest of the blue wing, but I will be going over that area with black the same way, so you'll be able to see that in just a little bit. But for now, I'm using that black, and this black is called Black Grape, but you can use whatever black that you have. And I'm going over that area, that little swoop at the very top of the head, and painting that in carefully. I'm also making sure that this black, it's not a super intense thick paint, that I have watered it down so it's a little, puddle on the plate, and you can test it on a piece of paper. You can always add more if it's not dark enough, if it looks just like a warm gray and it's not giving that black feeling for you. You can always add another layer of it when it's dry, or you can dab some of that black in from the pan while it's still wet, either way. But you don't want to go too heavy with the color because we'll be building up layers. We'll actually add one more layer to this after it's dry. And then also I am painting in the eye. For the eye, I leave just a little bit of the center part white so that it looks like the light is hitting the eye. But you can just paint the whole thing completely black and then go in after it's dry and with a little bit of white gouache, which you can see on my plate there. I did that, did the eye that way in a previous painting. I think I've painted maybe 8 of these goldfinch in preparation for this video. So I've done this many different ways, but since I've been painting for a long time, it's kind of easy for me to leave a little light area in the eye. But especially for a beginner, I would just paint the whole little circle of the eye black and then go back in with a little bit of white gouache or white watercolor to put that area in later. So now I'm going over the wing with the wash of the Black Grape, and I'm being careful to not paint over those little white areas so that I can keep them white. If you do paint over them, it's not the end of the world. If you have a white watercolor or even better, white gouache, you can paint those areas in after your black wing has dried, and you don't need to worry about keeping them white with the white paper. I do like the look of it, of them white as in the white paper shining through and not being painted over later. But either way, I really like it. It's very, very pretty either way. I'm just doing my best to keep the paper areas white. for this particular version of this goldfinch. Another way you can do this is to use masking fluid, where you paint the masking fluid on and then you wait for it to dry for about 10 minutes. Then you can paint on top of it, and once your watercolor is dry, you can use the masking fluid rubber remover or just your finger and pull it up, and it leaves a nice white crisp paper area where you had your masking fluid. So that's another way to do this as well. There are many ways. It just happens to be the one that I chose for this particular version of the goldfinch. So now I'm mixing a little bit of that black grape with the blue and adding a little bit of water as well. So it's a lighter gray blue, which you can test on a piece of paper to make sure it's what you want. And I just put that little tiny V at the bottom of the tail and then a little thin line up to kind of give it the look of the bird's body underneath the wing. So now I'm creating a little puddle of water, maybe about 5 brushfuls, and mixing in a little bit of the cadmium yellow deep, and then testing it out on a piece of scrap paper on top of the yellow that I have already used to make sure that it's dark enough as a shadow but not too dark. I add a little bit more in just to make sure that there is a difference between the two colors that is easy for my eye to see, so that I can use this cadmium yellow deep as a shadow color. So this might seem a bit intimidating, but remember, as long as the yellow is completely dry, if you put down some of the shadow and you don't like it, you can pick it back up with a paper towel. So have your paper towel handy just in case. And also, I've made this shadow that starts out underneath the little black area at the top of the head, swoops underneath the eye, kind of like a football player, and then comes down the shoulder of the bird, kind of the wing area of the bird. I've made it differently pretty much each time I have painted this bird. Kind of the general same shape, where it covers about half the head, and then it goes down the back and then swoops around a little curve on the top of the wing, kind of looks like a shoulder would, and then a little bit down the front and a little bit on the bottom. But each time I've done it, it looks different, and there's no perfect way to do this. It just gives you the feeling of 3-dimension for the bird, as long as you get that little curve up at the top where the wing is, and right underneath that black area, and a little kind of a curve underneath the eye. I think that it will look good. So don't worry about making it look just like mine. The many that I have done, none of them look exactly alike. So now I've mixed up a little bit of sepia, which is kind of a cool brown, and I'm going over the legs to make sure that they are a bit darker than the body, but not black. And after rinsing out the brush, we are going to put in the stem while we wait for that yellow area, the darker yellow shadow area, to dry. So for the stem of this coneflower, I'm using a color, it's called just bright green, in this Rosa Gallery Botanical 28 color set. You can use any green that you want. This just happens to be the one that I chose for this painting, because I really enjoy that bright, fun pop of color, especially with that bright yellow bird that we're painting. And because the middle of the stem dried a bit, I'm going back over it with the water just so that the entire stem dries about the same way, so it's not leaving a bunch of little lines in there. And then I'm mixing in a bit of the blue with the green to make a shadow just right underneath the flower. I really enjoy putting in shadows on my stems. It's not necessary, but I think it helps make it look more three-dimensional. And then I'm dabbing in a little bit of blue right at the top of that stem, right underneath the flower, so it looks like the sun is shining down on it, and the flower is making a bit of shadow on its stem. I'm rinsing off my brush, dabbing it on the paper towel, rinsing it some more, just to make sure I get all the color off the brush. And then I am going back into that little puddle of sepia, adding some more to it. And we are ready for the third layer, or the second layer of shadow, the third layer of paint in the yellow part of the bird's body. And starting right underneath that black swoop right by the beak, we're putting in a little bit of a darker shadow. So it's just adding more dimension to the bird, making it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And putting in that very light tea consistency layer of sepia right underneath on that front of the head section. And then we will also go down to the base of the body, or the bottom of the bird, the underside of the bird, and add some more there as well. So it looks like there's some shadow underneath the bird, just like with the shadow underneath the flower, to just make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. After looking at the shadow for a moment, I decided I wanted to add a bit more color into the shadow, a bit more glow, a bit of a darker value. So I add in a little bit of that cadmium yellow deep to the sepia and add that to the shadow down below. With the sepia still on my brush, I add in a little bit of the two yellows and add just a little bit of a shadow to the bird's face, kind of a swoop going to the left of the eye. Next, we're going into the orange. It's a cadmium orange, and painting the line going down kind of the center of the beak that separates the top and the bottom part of the beak, and then painting in just the bottom half of the beak with a light wash of orange. Then I wash off my brush and go in with that brighter cadmium yellow light into the stem of the coneflower, just to give it a pop of color to make it as bright and cheery as the goldfinch. We are almost done with the painting. One of the last things that I do is to go into the blue and add a wash of, or a light layer of blue over the black, so that it gives it a similar value as to the wing, or similar color to the wing, where if I did not go over that black with a layer or a glaze of blue, it would have more of a warm tone to it, which is fine too. But I kind of wanted it to match the wing a bit more, so I went over it with the glaze of blue so that it had more of a similar color to the wing. And then I'm using just a little bit of sepia and adding a shadow right underneath the wing where the wing and the body meet. So just for fun, I wanted to show you some of my practice birds that I did for this tutorial. This one is done in a similar way, where I've left the white of the paper just by not painting over it, and it's done in a very similar manner but still looks different. And this next one, it's the same bird just facing the opposite direction, And I painted in the black wing, and then after that black wing was completely dry, I use a bit of white gouache to paint in those white areas to suggest the feathers. And for this version, I did the same way, but the feathers are painted in a little bit differently. If you're interested in painting the feathers with gouache or in a different way, let me know, and I would be happy to do another bird tutorial. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.